Hi, I'm Marcus, and for 5 years, I gave everything to a company that treated me like I was disposable, not just underappreciated, invisible unless something went wrong, but it wasn't always like that. When I started at Onyx Marketing, I was fresh out of grad school, bright-eyed, sharp-suited, ready to climb the ladder. I believed if I worked hard, kept my head down, and played by the rules, someone would eventually notice. And someone did, but not in the way I'd hoped. His name was Derek Hensley, VP of Strategy, a man who wore tailored suits like armor and made insecurity look like confidence. You know the type, quick with a joke, louder when he's wrong, always, ready to remind you who signs your paycheck. People laughed at his sarcasm not because it was funny, but because it was safer than silence. It happened during our weekly team sync, in that glass conference room that always smelled like burnt coffee and toner. I was presenting our latest numbers and strategy ideas when someone mentioned my side hustle, an online shop I'd started selling custom phone cases. It was tiny, barely made a few $100 a month, but it was mine. My idea. My name. Derek. Leaned back, smirked, and said, "Marcus, buddy, is this why your campaign numbers look half-baked? You're too busy being Jeff Bezos on Etsy?" The room went quiet, then filled with stifled chuckles. Even the interns giggled, unsure whether they were allowed to laugh. I swallowed hard and forced a polite smile, but inside my face was burning. I could feel my heart pounding in my throat. I opened my mouth to respond, but Derek wasn't done. "Tell you what," he said, gesturing to the projector screen. "Next quarter, if your little sticker shop breaks even, maybe we'll let you run the coffee orders too." More laughter, this time louder, crueler. I sat down. Quietly. I didn't argue. Didn't explain. I just stared at the table and nodded like a good little soldier. But something shifted in that silence. Something that didn't laugh with them. I went home that night, skipped dinner, and stared at my laptop. I opened up my business dashboard. Nothing impressive. Just a handful of sales, maybe 2 returning customers, and a clunky website I'd built myself. But in that moment, it felt like the only thing I owned that wasn't tied to someone else's approval. And something in me clicked. I didn't want revenge, not at first. I just wanted out. Out of the meetings. Out of the fake smiles. Out of the hierarchy that rewarded cruelty and punished creativity. I wanted to see what would happen if I gave my idea the same energy I gave Derek's ego. I stayed up all night, planning, rethinking everything. I didn't know how I'd scale, how I'd fund it, or even if anyone would care. But I knew this. I wasn't going to be the punchline in someone else's story anymore. That meeting. That one comment. It lit a fire in me that never went out. And exactly 1 year later, I'd walk back into that same building. Not as an employee, but as the owner. The day after that meeting, I started waking up at 4:30 a.m. Not because I'm some kind of productivity guru, but because that was the only time no one needed me. No calls, no meetings, just silence, my laptop, and the brittle determination of a man who had just been humiliated. I began with research. Deep, obsessive research. I wasn't just going to make pretty phone cases anymore. I studied materials, customer behavior, fulfillment, processes, shipping strategies, digital marketing, conversion funnels, every single piece of the puzzle. If I couldn't outspend the big guys, I was going to outthink them. I stopped watching Netflix, skipped happy hours, said no to every brunch, and birthday I could reasonably avoid. My world shrunk to 3 things. My day job, my side hustle, and that echo of Derek's voice in my head, still laughing. My apartment became a warehouse. Boxes piled up in corners, inventory stacked beside my bed, labels and packaging material lived on my kitchen counter. My living room smelled like a printing press and plastic, but I didn't care. At work, I kept quiet, nodded through Derek's passive-aggressive digs, took notes, listened closely in every meeting, Not because I cared about their strategy, but because I was learning how they thought, how they moved, what they missed. I watched the cracks they didn't even know existed, and behind the scenes, I reinvested every dollar my little shop made. I upgraded my packaging, outsourced fulfillment to a third-party logistics center, built a stronger website, improved customer service, created custom designs through freelance artists. When I didn't know how to do something, I Googled until I did. It wasn't glamorous. Most nights I worked until my eyes blurred. There were weeks where I didn't make a single sale, where I questioned everything. But every time I wanted to quit, I remembered that laugh, that smirk, that feeling of being small, and then came the moment that changed everything. It was a Saturday morning. I had just added a few new case designs to the site, nothing fancy, just some trending aesthetics based on pop culture and minimalist art. I paid a micro-influencer on TikTok to review the cases, thinking maybe it would drive a few sales. By Monday, I had over 800 orders. My site crashed. My inbox exploded. People were tagging, sharing, duetting, DMing. That one video had gone viral, and suddenly my quiet little side hustle was now a full-fledged business. I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years, not to rest, but to fulfill every one of those orders with my own 2 hands. I worked non-stop for 48 hours, running on caffeine, adrenaline, and the knowledge that I was on to something real. The following week, I filed the paperwork to incorporate my business, gave it a name, built a brand, invested in better systems. My profits tripled, then quadrupled. I hired my first virtual assistant, then a freelance designer, then someone to manage logistics. People around me at work started noticing. Whispers started to circulate. Some colleagues asked casually about my shop, pretending they hadn't laughed a few months ago. Even Derek once joked, "Hey Marcus, how's Amazon treating you?" I smiled, but this time the laugh didn't hurt. It fueled me, because I had a plan now, a bigger one. I wasn't just going to run a business, I was going to run a company. And the next time Derek saw me, it wouldn't be as a name on an org chart. It would be across the negotiation table. 3 months after that TikTok spike, my side business was pulling in more revenue than my full-time salary. By all traditional standards, I should have been thrilled. But I was exhausted. I was living a double life, clocking in for Derek by day, building an empire by night. I'd start my mornings reviewing customer service issues, placing inventory orders, managing ad campaigns. Then I'd log into work, sit through meetings about client accounts I didn't care about, and pretend I was still just grateful to be here. But I wasn't. I was building something real, something mine, and every minute I spent working under Derek felt like I was betraying that. The breaking point came one Thursday afternoon. We were on a client call, and Derek, true to form, threw me under the bus. Again. We were discussing a failed campaign that he'd overpromised to the client and micromanaged into the ground. But instead of taking accountability, he casually shifted blame onto me mid-meeting. "Marcus must have misread the data," he said with a sigh, looking directly into the webcam. "We'll clean it up. No warning, no conversation. Just public humiliation." When the call ended, I stared at my reflection in the blank screen for a long moment. And that's when I made the decision. I didn't need the job anymore. I didn't want it. I wasn't learning. I wasn't growing. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was just done. That night, I poured a glass of whiskey, opened my laptop, and typed my resignation letter. I didn't make it dramatic, didn't reference the mockery or the insults. Just a clean 2 weeks' notice, with a polite thank you. The next day, I handed it in during our morning meeting. Derek looked up from his phone, eyebrows raised. "Seriously?" he said, like I had just told him I was quitting to join the circus. "Yeah," I replied. "I've got some opportunities I need to focus on." He chuckled, smug as ever. "Well, best of luck. Hope those opportunities pay better than dental coverage." I nodded. They already do. And I walked out of that meeting with no job security, no guaranteed backup plan. But for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The next 2 weeks were a blur. I wrapped up loose ends at work during the day, then spent every other waking second expanding my brand. I hired a full-time operations manager, outsourced customer service, built out a brand partnership team. And on my last day, as I packed up, my cubicle, filled with 5 years of folders, coffee mugs, and memories, I realized something strange. I wasn't bitter. Derek's mockery, his arrogance, his constant belittling, it had pushed me to build something that could stand on its own. Without him, without the company, without their approval. I left without fanfare. No goodbye party, no card, just a nod from HR and a printed exit checklist. But as I walked through the parking lot toward my car, I turned back one last time and looked up at the office windows. They'll see me again, I whispered to myself. But next time, I'll be on the other side of the table. I didn't know then how soon that promise would come true. Freedom didn't hit all at once. The first Monday after quitting felt strange. No alarms, no meetings, no Derek, just quiet, stillness. For the first time in years, my time was mine. Completely. But with that freedom came pressure. The safety net was gone. Every decision, every ad I ran, every customer experience mattered. This wasn't a hobby anymore. It was my career. And the line between success and failure, thin as paper. So I did what I'd trained myself to do. I got to work. My first move was to turn my bedroom into a proper home office. Dual monitors, whiteboards covered in revenue projections, calendars color-coded for product drops, content rollouts, partnership calls. My life became a startup war room. I hired my first 2 full-time employees, a customer experience lead and a content strategist. Both were freelancers I'd worked with before. They believed in the vision, and they worked like they had something to prove, just like I did. We launched a new product line, limited edition, collaboration-based designs, and the response was electric. Pre-orders sold out in 2 hours. Influencers began tagging us organically. Reviews poured in, and with every milestone I made a note of it, not to brag, but to remember, because I knew this wasn't just about profit anymore. It was about building a legacy, a business that couldn't be laughed off in a meeting. 6 months in, we hit our first major media feature. A niche tech blog ran a profile, The Ex-Marketer, who turned mockery into millions. From there, things moved fast. I brought on an operations consultant. We moved inventory from third-party warehouses to our own small space, launched our own mobile app, set our sights on licensing deals, and in the midst of that chaos I got a call from an old colleague, someone still working at Onyx. "Hey," he said, low and nervous, "have you heard what's happening over here?" I hadn't thought about Onyx in months. They're bleeding clients. Derek's floundering. Leadership's looking to sell off a chunk of the business. I felt my heart pause. "Sell? How much?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He didn't know the exact number, but it wasn't astronomical. Not anymore. Not with the position I was in. That night, I opened my books, ran numbers, talked to my finance guy, and within a week, I made some quiet inquiries. Turns out the rumors were true. Onyx had mismanaged several accounts, burned bridges, and missed payroll more than once. Their valuation had plummeted. They needed a buyer, and suddenly I wasn't just an ex-employee anymore. I was the one with leverage. When I submitted the offer through a holding company, I made sure no one would connect it to me. I didn't want emotion clouding the deal. This wasn't revenge. It was strategy. 2 months of back-and-forth negotiations later, I got the call. Offer accepted. Contracts signed. I now owned a majority stake in the very company that once mocked the idea of me ever being anything more than the phone case guy. But I wasn't done yet. There was one more thing I needed to do, something that couldn't be handled over email. I scheduled interviews with the remaining department leads, and at the very bottom of the list was Derek. Section 5. The interview. Face-to-face. With Derek, I'll admit it, when I saw Derek's name pop up on the candidate list, I stared at it for a long time. There it was, the same man who'd laughed at my dreams. The man who once treated me like a footnote, now applying for a position at the company I owned. He didn't know, of course. The paperwork had gone through quietly. The company still operated under its original name. But I had full control. I just hadn't made it public. Yet, he had applied for a senior marketing role. Not VP, not executive level, just a role. I almost skipped over it, almost delegated the interview to someone else. But I didn't. I scheduled it for Friday. 10 a.m. I reserved the biggest conference room, and I showed up early just to sit there for a moment and soak it all in. At 9:59, the door creaked open. Derek walked in wearing the same expensive suit, the same overconfident swagger. He didn't recognize me at first. Why would he? In his mind, I was probably still in some dusty apartment selling decals online. He glanced at me, gave that polite corporate smile and said, "Hey, sorry, are you HR or—" I leaned back in my chair and said calmly, "No, I'm Marcus." The look on his face, I'll never forget it. His brows furrowed, his mouth opened slightly. Marcus? And then it clicked. His face went pale. His eyes scanned the room, again like he was checking to make sure this wasn't some elaborate prank. I stood up, extended a hand. "Welcome back to Onyx," I said. "I'm the new owner." He didn't say a word, just shook my hand, stiff as a board. I motioned for him to sit. We started the interview, formally at least. I asked him about his background, recent clients, leadership style. He stammered, through most of it, trying to find his footing. I kept my expression neutral, professional. Then I asked the final question. How do you handle underperforming team members? He paused, swallowed hard. Well, he said slowly, I believe in coaching first, encouragement, everyone has potential. I nodded. Interesting, because I remember once being told, in a room full of people, that I wasn't cut out for much more than coffee runs. His eyes dropped to the table. I could see his jaw tighten. Marcus, listen. I was out of line. I didn't know you were serious about— You didn't have to know, I interrupted. You could have treated people with respect, but you didn't. Silence. He tried to backpedal. Look, I've changed. I've had a rough few months. I just need a shot. I leaned forward. My voice stayed calm. I'm not here to humiliate. You, Derek. I've moved past that. But I need people on this team who uplift others, not belittle them. People who don't lead by fear or mockery. He nodded, eyes still down. And while I appreciate your interest in rejoining the company, I added, I think we both know this isn't a good fit. He didn't argue. He stood slowly. His face was stone, his shoulders heavier than when he walked in. I get it, he said, voice low. Thanks for the opportunity. As he turned to leave, I said one last thing. Derek? He stopped, but didn't turn around. Next time you see someone building something you don't understand, maybe don't laugh. You never know who'll be sitting on the other side of the table. He nodded once and walked out, and just like that, the circle closed. Not with a shout. Not with revenge, but with power and peace. Derek's departure marked more than just the end of an old chapter. It was the moment I finally understood. This wasn't about getting even. It was about building something better, something that could never exist under people like him. When I officially announced my ownership of Onyx, the office reaction was mixed. A few jaws dropped, some eyes narrowed, and a lot of quiet whispers filled the halls. I didn't care. Let them talk. My first order of business? Culture reset. For years, Onyx had thrived on ego, hierarchy, and fear. Middle managers who bullied quietly, executives who cared more about their parking spots than their people. I wasn't going to let the same rot grow under my name. So I called an all-hands meeting, not in the stuffy conference room, but in the open lounge area. No suits, no PowerPoint decks. Just me, standing in front of a room of employees who didn't quite know what to expect. "I used to sit in the back of this room," I said, "and I remember what it felt like to be dismissed, to be invisible. Some of you know that feeling, too." I scanned the room. People looked up, really looked. No one scrolled through their phones, no side chatter, just a quiet tension like they were waiting to see if I meant it. "That ends today," I said. "This company isn't just changing owners. It's changing direction." I laid out the new values: collaboration over competition, ideas over titles, empathy over intimidation. Every team would be restructured. Leaders who had enabled toxic behavior were quietly let go. Others were given a chance to grow into better ones, with coaching, not condemnation. I opened an anonymous channel where employees could speak freely, about anything. I listened. I responded. I made changes. Some people quit. I let them. But the ones who stayed, they became the heart of something new. We rebuilt from the inside out. I brought in consultants to train teams on emotional intelligence, conflict resolution, leadership that listens. We updated our branding to reflect our new values. We made our hiring process more inclusive, our workflow more flexible. And when I walked through those halls now, it felt different, lighter, brighter. People smiled at each other. Meetings were filled with real ideas, not just people talking over each other to impress whoever was in charge. We launched a new campaign, one that came from an intern's pitch deck. It went viral within days. Clients noticed. Our inbox flooded with new partnership inquiries. Former clients we'd lost under Derek reached out, curious to work with us again. The numbers soared. But what mattered more was the people. For the first time, I saw junior team members stepping up with confidence, managers advocating for their staff, designers collaborating with marketers without playing politics. I watched all this unfold, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Pride, not just in myself, but in what we were becoming. There was a moment, late one evening when most of the office had cleared out, that I stood by the glass wall overlooking the city, just breathing it in. It hit me then. I didn't just buy a company. I reclaimed my dignity. I turned insult into infrastructure, mockery into motivation, and I built a workplace where no one else would ever be made to feel like a joke for dreaming big. This was my company now. But more than that, it was a place where people like me could finally belong. A few weeks after rebuilding Onyx from the inside, a journalist reached out, someone from a major entrepreneurial platform who had seen our viral campaign. She wanted to do a profile on the new ownership and the cultural transformation we were leading. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't one for the spotlight, but part of me knew this story mattered, not just because of what had happened, but because of who it might reach. People still sitting in cubicles, still being mocked for dreaming bigger. So I agreed. The article came out with the headline, "From Side Hustle to CEO, the man who bought the company that laughed at him." It exploded. Within hours, my inbox was full. Emails from strangers telling me they felt seen. Tweets went viral. LinkedIn posts turned into forums of hope and vindication. People shared their own stories of being dismissed, belittled, underestimated. And suddenly, this wasn't just about me, it became a movement. We started a mentorship program for early-stage entrepreneurs. I hosted webinars breaking down how I built my business from the ground up, mistakes and all. We partnered with nonprofits to fund small business grants for overlooked communities. It wasn't about ego anymore. It was about proving that you don't have to play dirty to win, that kindness can scale, that empathy isn't weakness, it's power. And the most surreal part? Derek reached out. Not for a second chance. He knew that door was closed, but to say something I never thought I'd hear from him. "You were right," he said in a short private email. "I was too busy playing king to notice you were building a kingdom. I hope you keep changing the game." I stared at that line for a long time, not because I needed his validation, but because I didn't. 6 months after the transition, we held our first annual company retreat under the new leadership. We rented a lake house 3 hours out of town. No presentations, no awkward icebreakers, just a weekend of reflection, connection, and team building. We sat around fire pits and shared personal stories. Some employees cried, talking about how close they were to quitting before the shift. Others spoke about how this job had saved them, not just financially, but emotionally. And I sat there, watching it all unfold, stunned by what we had built together. On the last night, someone handed me a photo. It was a picture of me, years ago, sitting at my old cubicle, sleeves rolled up, expression worn. I'd forgotten that version of me, but somehow, someone had saved it. They framed it. Below it, they wrote, "For the guy who didn't just rise. He lifted all of us with him." I don't cry often, but I did that night, because in that moment, I saw the full arc of it all, from the punchline in a boardroom to the man steering a company with purpose, from silence to impact, from humiliation to legacy. I went back to the office the next week and hung that photo right outside the executive suite. Not to boast, but to remind anyone who walked by, dreams are not weaknesses. They are blueprints for something they can't yet see. If you've made it this far into my story, maybe it's because something in it feels familiar. Maybe you've been laughed at too. Maybe your dream doesn't fit inside the office you sit in or the small talk at dinner parties. Maybe someone told you you weren't cut out for more, or rolled their eyes when you dared to think differently. I want to tell you something I wish someone had told me in that meeting room, the day I was made to feel small. Keep going. You don't need their approval. You don't need their applause. What you're building matters, even if no one sees it yet. The day I walked out of that company, I had no guarantees, just belief, and it was enough. Because 1 year later, the very same people who mocked me had to interview to stay in the world I rebuilt. I'm not special. I just stopped listening to people who didn't believe in building anything themselves. So if you're sitting on an idea, start. If you're tired of being the joke, get quiet and get to work. And if they ever laugh at you, smile. Because someday, they might just have to knock on your door, and when they do, make sure they see who's sitting on the other side of the table now.